My favorite day of the year is commencement. And this year, I get to do this twice. Once with you, and again in May at Yale. So I feel doubly blessed. It is especially important for me to be here at CUHK because we have a relationship with you and have had a relationship with you for a good number of years. Our two divinity schools share some things in common. We're both part of universities and we're both ecumenical. Neither school has a tie to a single denomination, but rather serves the larger Christian community. And so it is a distinct honor for me to be here on your 60th anniversary as you celebrate this milestone in your history. And I hope that my presence will convey to you my personal commitment to our relationship and my institution's commitment to maintaining and fostering this relationship. I'm very grateful. I also want to say my hearty congratulations to every one of you who is graduating. You have not only earned a degree, but you have earned a degree at a very premier university. You belong to a special group of people in your society. I also feel compelled to say a special word of commendation to all the spouses out there or partners who have suffered long with you as you earned your degree, and to your parents who have stood by you, if your parents are like mine, wondering, is he ever going to graduate? Is he ever going to finish school? But to all of you, a very hearty bravo. Universities exist to address the major issues that confront humanity. Divinity schools exist to address the ethical and spiritual concerns that are inextricably interwoven within those issues. I would like to address one of the most fundamental challenges and needs in our world with you today. On January 17th, 2017, the White House press secretary, Sean Spicer, claimed that the previous day's presidential inauguration ceremony had drawn, quote, the largest audience to ever witness an inauguration, period, both in person and around the globe. Now, the statement was obviously incorrect to Americans who routinely watch inaugurations. We all knew that that wasn't accurate. 5 days later, a reporter, Chuck Todd, asked Kellyanne Conway, who was the U.S. counselor attorney to the president, during an interview for Meet the Press. That's a television show in which reporters interview politicians and their spokespersons, why Spicer stated a provable falsehood. Conway responded that Spicer was giving alternative facts. Todd rejoined, wait a minute, alternative facts? Alternative facts are not facts, they're falsehoods, end of quote. Their exchange and others that followed it made alternative facts a buzzword in American culture. Even the Germans and Austrians got in on the act and declared alternative facts to be the unword of 2017. And while we might laugh at some of the ways in which alternative facts were satirized, like Jimmy Fallon's Two Truths and an Alternative Fact, if you ever watch an American late night show, the issue was very serious. Steven Spielberg recognized this, and in an acceptance speech for an award for the film The Post, which chronicled the decision of the owner of the Washington Post, that's one of the major newspapers in the United States, to run the story about Watergate, Spielberg said, "We are in a fight, And it's fight not just about alternative facts, but it's a fight about the objective truth, end of quote. And while our epistemologists among us might debate the phrase objective truth, Spielberg's point stands. We have a moral obligation to report accurately, or to put it in good old-fashioned English, to tell the truth. This is not a new issue. Our text addresses a challenge in the ancient world when elaborate systems of oaths were generated to serve as guarantees that a person was not giving alternative facts, but was speaking the truth. Ancients and moderns alike want to affirm that their words are true. And so in the U.S., in English today, you will hear people say something like, "I'd swear it on my grandmother's grave," or "I'd swear it on a stack of Bibles," or "I swear it up and down," as a way of buttressing what they're saying. But it was this situation that Jesus addressed in the fourth of the 6 antitheses in the Sermon on the Mount. Each antithesis draws a contrast between the religious practice of his day and what Jesus understood to be morally right and morally wrong. So he opens with the practices of his day. He says, "You've heard that it was said, 'Don't swear falsely, but keep your oaths.'" Well, that's a summary that all of us know. If you're thinking of the Decalogue, you can think of, "You will not take the Lord your God in vain." That's not talking about profanity. It's talking about taking an oath and in God's name and failing to keep that oath. Or you're not to bear false witness. Or if you think about the holiness code in Leviticus, we're told not to swear by the name of God unjustly. The point is that for the people of the ancient world, there was a conviction that if you used the name of God in an oath, you were obligated to keep it, but if you didn't, it wasn't quite so serious. And so the text proceeds to note 4 ways in which some offered circumlocutions to avoid saying the name of God, reasoning that if they used one of these circumlocutions, they would not have to keep their oath. So the 4 move from the broadest, heaven, to the narrowest, our heads. And Jesus says the first and the second alternatives, to swear by heaven and earth, are completely unacceptable. Heaven is God's throne, Isaiah 66, and the earth is God's footstool, as Isaiah also declares. And the third, to swear by Jerusalem, is also unacceptable, because Jerusalem is the city of the great king, as Psalm 45 declares. And finally, he says, you can't swear by your head because you don't control your absolute future. And he uses a figure that today may sound a little quaint, that you can't turn one hair of your head white or black. Some of you are thinking this was before Clairol or dyes for our hair. But you get the point. We don't control our own fates. So you can't swear by your head. And Jesus simply says, away with all of these rationales that would keep you from standing on your word. They're all worthless. Now that's pretty shocking, because the Old Testament says and gives us guidelines on how to take an oath. It even in Genesis 22 presents God as taking an oath by himself. And Jesus says, no oaths, no swearing. Now that's created a little bit of consternation in Christian circles. Does this mean you can never take an oath? Some have said that, like the Anabaptists, the Quakers. Leo Tolstoy, the famous Russian novelist, went so far as to say Jesus forbids courts of law even by this statement. But if these words go back to the historical Jesus, and I'm inclined to think they do, since they have a parallel in James and in Justin Martyr, then it's likely that early Christians knew about this statement, and yet they still took oaths. They didn't understand it to be absolute. So how did they understand it? They understood it to be a requirement that we tell the truth, that we are honest, that we not utter alternative facts, or not have what George Orwell called in his futuristic novel 1984, doublethink. Jesus made this clear in his final statement when he said, let your speech, let your word be yes, yes, no, no. In other words, let your yes be a true yes, not a no. And let your no be a true no, not a yes. And don't say, yes, I'd swear it on my mother's grave, or no, I'd swear that on a stack of Bibles. It's a simple matter of giving your word. Now, I don't know how many of you know American films, but I'm going to be bold here and give one example from an American film. There's an old film called Jerry Maguire that stars Tom Cruise. It's a great film, I think. But anyway, it's based on the true story of a sports agent. And this agent, who in the movie is played by Cruise, is named Jerry, goes to see one of his clients in the hospital. And this client's son challenges him. And he starts thinking about the way that he represents his clients. And he's in a hotel and he has an epiphany one night. And he gets up in the middle of the night and writes a new mission statement for the company, which cost him his job. They fired him. So he started going around to all of his clients saying, I'll represent you independently, but they were all disappearing before he could even get them on the phone. So he decided to go to his prized client, who is slated to be the -- 1 pick in the NFL draft, which in America is a big deal. And so he walked in to see this client, and his father was there. In the movie, he's called Matt. And he says to Matt, I have a contract for you to represent CUHK, his son. And Matt says, I don't believe in paper. A handshake is what I will stand on. My word is strong as oak. And so he accepts that. And you already know what's going to happen. Jerry goes to the NFL draft, goes to the hotel room before the draft takes place, sees Matt and his son CUHK, and Matt tells him that he's decided that he would go with Jerry's former company. And Jerry looks at him and he says, strong as oak, and walks out of the room. His word wasn't good. When I was a boy in high school, I worked for some friends on a farm in the summers at times. They lived in eastern Oregon. And they had different crops. One of their crops was alfalfa, hay for cows, cattle. And one year at the end of the summer, the next door neighbor, lived about a mile away, came and made an agreement to purchase all of this alfalfa for his herd for X amount of dollars. I don't know how much it was, but anyway, they agreed on a price. The neighbor who lived up the road a few more miles came about a week later and said to Ward, the owner of this farm, I'd like to buy your alfalfa crop this year. And Ward said, well, I've already sold it to so-and-so next door. And he said, well, what did he offer you for it? And he told him, he said, well, I'll give you far more than that. Do you have a contract? He says, no, I have a handshake. He says, well, look, this guy would quickly forget any kind of a handshake if he could make more money. And Ward said, but I've given my word and it stands. I have never forgotten that. That was a few years ago when this happened. I was in high school. But what's so important about that is that this is ultimately not about what you say, it is who you are and your moral character. And that is what Ward Amick preserved when he stood by his word and gave up whatever amount of money that was. Jesus is telling us that we need to be people of moral character and stand by our words and not need to buttress them with an oath. I don't know Chinese, so I don't know what your oaths are in Chinese, but I'm sure you have them. And I will tell you that when someone says to me, well, I swear to my grandmother's grave, I immediately become suspicious that this person's not telling me the truth. Because if they have to buttress what they're saying with an oath, I'm suspicious that what they say is not credible. Now, I don't know how much you know about American politics right now, but I want to give an illustration from them. I fear you know about these things. I actually hope you don't, but I'm afraid that you do. We have a problem with truth-telling in Washington, D.C. People seem to have entered into an epidemic of lying. So we have one former president who, during the time he was in office, misrepresented things 30,573 times in 4 years. Now, you can make a mistake, but when you make 30,573 mistakes, it's not an accident. There's a congressional representative who lives not very far from where I do. He lives on Long Island in New York, who's now under investigation and has 33 federal charges leveled against him because he has repeatedly lied about his background and about his campaign finances. And for the life of me, I can't figure out why his colleagues in Congress don't throw him out of the Congress. Now, I believe somebody's innocent until proven guilty, but this guy's already been proven guilty multiple times. And then there's a senator from another party in the state next door who has accepted bribes from Egypt in return for information, and those bribes include even getting bars of gold which were found in his house. And again, how can this person represent me? And I want to say to these people, do you have no moral compass? Do you have no principles? No integrity at all? I don't want them representing me. The price for this is that we don't trust one another. We're suspicious of each other. There's a firm known as the Edelman Trust Barometer, and it measures how we trust one another. Their latest report was released in 2022. They surveyed 36,000 people in 28 different countries. And the most surprising thing that came out of that poll was that 6 out of 10 people around the world said they don't trust someone until they've proven that they're credible. I want you to think about that for a minute. How do I have a conversation with you and you with me about something over which we disagree? Unless we already know one another. I don't trust you, so whatever you say, I simply dismiss. The conversation is over before it ever starts. That's the mess that we find ourselves in. We have to trust one another. What happens in a marriage if one spouse doesn't trust the other spouse? That marriage ends. What happens in a friendship when one friend can't trust their colleague? The friendship ends. What happens in society when we can't trust one another? Society becomes dysfunctional. Now, why am I saying that to you? You are about ready to go out and to become leaders of churches, leaders of educational institutions, leaders in business, leaders in civic organizations. If people can't trust you, whom can they trust? Your word needs to be your bond. Your yes must mean yes, and your no must mean no. And you should never have to buttress it with a bunch of oaths that don't amount to anything anyway. Be a person of principle. Be a leader that people can trust. Because what we desperately need in our world right now are people who will lead, but who will lead faithfully, and in whom the rest of us have confidence that they mean what they say. I hope you will do that. Our world desperately needs you. Thank you, and God bless.